So as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we began exploring some of the first witnesses to Jesus' resurrection. That first week, we heard a little bit about Jesus' most important question to his disciples. Who do you say that I am? It's also one of the most important questions that each of us gets to answer in our daily living. And so far, we've learned that Jesus' disciples were all willing to be killed for saying that Jesus was the Son of God, right? We learned that all but John was a martyr. But this leads me to ask another really important question in our lives. How many of us recollect what Jesus actually said about himself? Who did he claim to be, and who did Jesus say that he was? Did he ever truly admit or say that he was the Son of God? And some people will say when you read through the Gospels, Jesus himself never truly claims to be God or God's Son. He never takes a moment to say to everyone, oh, hey, by the way, my name's Jesus and I'm God's Son. Like my joke, hi, I'm Christian and that's my first name. Let that sink in for a second, you'll all start giggling. But the people around him conclude, therefore, that because Jesus never made any of these outrageous claims about himself, that he was not truly God. The fact that people claimed that he was God's Son were simply made up stories by other people who thought there was something special about him. That's what was going on in his time. Now, for us sitting here 2,000 years later, there's a really obvious problem with this. If Jesus never claimed to be God, why exactly did he die? I mean, after all, he was arrested and crucified for blasphemy for claiming to be God. We know that Pilate couldn't find a crime to convict him of, but he was still killed. So again, I go back to, for us sitting here 2,000 years later, the obvious answer to that question is, Jesus was the Son of God. But the problem for folks at that time is that the chief priests could not buy what Jesus was selling. In other words, they didn't believe him. And so they planned to have him killed because they believed he committed the most heinous of all crimes at that time, and that was the crime of blasphemy, when he claimed to be equal with God. The problem was that they could not eliminate him. They couldn't sentence him to death. He needed to be sentenced by the Roman government. Enter into the scene Pontius Pilate. And in the drama that Melody just read for us, we heard how Pilate struggled with this idea of sentencing Jesus and trying to make sense of what it was the Roman or the Jewish leaders were saying about him, how they wanted or why they wanted this man dead. And in Pilate's questions, I can hear frustration and irritation about not getting a straight answer and not knowing for what reason Jesus' followers have now turned on him. It's like talking to a 3-year-old who continually asks you the question, why? Right? I mean, that's the kind of sense I get out of this drama. I can also imagine him pacing through the palace after all of this is said and done, asking anyone who would listen long enough the questions weighing in his heart. And I can hear these questions as if they're coming from my own mind. Questions like, why did the crowds want him dead? Why were they so angry? And I can see him wrestling with these questions. Maybe he finds one of his guards to talk to. And together they try to find the truth about this man named Jesus. The problem is that we don't have these records. We don't have the whole picture, do we? We have no idea what Pilate was wrestling with in this time. We only see a portion of his interaction with Christ. We don't even see all of the interaction. We get to see just this tiny little bit of what Pilate may be going through. But in my mind, I can totally see him struggling with the question he does ask. And when he asks Jesus who he was, Jesus says, "You said I am." And Pilate responds, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and their leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done?" He wants to justify himself for handing down a death sentence to someone that he truly finds innocent. And I'll go back to what we just talked about in the time for all. Jesus was brought to him guilty until proven innocent. And Pilate could find nothing wrong. As much as Pilate is painted as the villain in many of our minds, in many of the stories about him, some of them are justified. I think there's a small portion in this story today of Pilate that feels like he might have done something wrong in sentencing Jesus to death. And amid all of this back and forth that we witness, I want to take a moment to try and put ourselves in Pilate's shoes for a moment. I know it will be hard for us to do that, but let's just give it a try. So let's set the scene of this drama unfolding after Pilate issues Jesus' sentence of death. So here's the scene. What we have before us is a moment after the verdict, right? This is after Pilate has issued the verdict of death. When the noises die down and the questions refuse to be silenced in his head and his heart. And he's exhausted. I can see him being relieved that this day is finally over. I mean, how many of us have had a day like that in our lives, right? We just want to go back home. We want to sit down in front of the TV, put our feet up, grab a cup of coffee, and relax. Or whatever your drink of choice may be in the moment. Right? We've had these days. And he tells himself that Jesus is dead. He's unsettled, and he's convinced himself that the trial was like any other. The problem is that he's now alone, and he's by himself with his own thoughts. The crowds are gone. The truth no longer really matters at this moment, but I can hear him continuing to ask that question, what is the truth? And as he paces, one of his guards enters into the space going, okay, somebody needs to talk to this guy because he's going off his rocker. And this guard is an ordinary, unimportant person. He's off duty, but he comes into the scene and he enters into a quiet conversation with the man who has authority and power over him. And something profound begins to happen. I can see them standing in a chamber somewhere having this conversation. And as the conversation begins, Pilate names the troubles that he has. And he's recollecting the trial and the questions and the conversation. Not because of the crowds. Pilate and the guard have seen violent crowds before, but it's because of the political pressure that he has just undergone. He has navigated this for the first time in his whole career. And I can hear the internal voice that cannot be silenced saying, it's not them. It's not anything else. It's that man. That man, I can't get him out of my mind. I mean, he didn't plead for his life like the others before him. Jesus didn't spend his final breaths defending himself, and he certainly did not fight to survive. Instead, he spoke of a kingdom not of this world. He spoke of truth. He stood before Pilate with a calm that unsettles even the most powerful of people. I can imagine that guard standing there wondering what exactly was happening. I mean, here's his boss, the procurator of Judea, one of the most powerful men in the Roman government, talking to him like they're best friends. But the thing is this guard actually seems to be invited into the conversation as a trusted advisor. And so for our purposes today, we're going to look at him that very same way. I can see the guard helping Pilate and us to see the irony of this entire situation. It would seem to me that every other trial that we see focuses on the crime, yet this trial focused on the person. And Jesus is condemned not for what he did, but for who he claimed to be. And he claimed to be the one who can forgive sin, the one who's seated at the right hand of power, and the one who can declare and dares to speak with God's authority. And he speaks the truth of who he really is throughout his life, despite how few people actually listen to him. Now think about that for a moment. Jesus has been condemned to death because of who he says that he is. Now, can you imagine going out on the street claiming to be an accountant and somebody throws you in jail for doing that? It sounds ridiculous, but this is essentially what happened. Jesus has been condemned to die because of who he says he is, not because of what he did or did not do. It's a case of being guilty until proven innocent. The thing is, Pilate knows this, and he doesn't want to condemn Jesus, an innocent man. And so he tries to absolve himself. He tries to justify what he's doing. He washes his hands, both symbolically and literally. Despite listening to reason, despite listening to his wife's warning, he convinces himself that compromise is his responsibility. Yet that one final question, the question that Pilate asks in exasperation, rings through until today. What is truth? Because the trial focused on the person did not end that day. It still has not ended. The question Pilate tried to dismiss did not disappear. The truth that Jesus spoke could not be silenced by the cross, because we're still talking about it 2,000 years later. The interesting part of all this to me is that Pilate asks that question, what is truth? Jesus had already given him the answer to that question. Not with an argument, but with his very life. Truth is not an idea to be debated. Truth is not a story we can forget. Truth is a person who stands before us, silent yet still speaking, condemned yet victorious over the grave. Friends, we can see how the world has tried to move on, but God refuses to let go, right? Yes? No? Okay. I mean, you don't have to say yes just because I'm asking, but God still reaches through the generations into our hearts, right? How do we know that? Because 3 days after the events that we read this morning, a miraculous thing happened. The one who did not defend himself was vindicated by rising from the dead. The one judged by power was revealed as the Lord of glory by rising from the dead. The one everyone thought would be forgotten became the name above every name because he rose from the grave. Pilate's question is still ours today. The temptation to wash our hands is always present, and it's very real. The comfort of thinking this will pass. How many of us have said that before in our lives? Right? That temptation is strong. The comfort of feeling those words is strong. But Jesus still stands before us, not on trial, but calling out to us, beckoning us to come into his presence, calling us to listen, calling us to recognize truth, not as convenience, but as a commitment to one another, calling us not to forget, but to follow. And I guess what I'm getting at here is that the real question remains, and it's not really what is truth. We already know the truth. The real question is, will we listen to his voice? The Gospels weren't written today. I get it. They were written some 2,000 years ago. The writing style used in Jesus' day was to report events as a story. When you're reading these narratives and these stories, you need to look at the events and the progression of the story clearly to understand the meaning. We know how those four Gospels have come together and state that Jesus was killed for blasphemy, for claiming to be God. But he did not just claim it, he owned it. He lived it. He did spectacular things to show that he was God. Throughout the stories in the Gospel, Jesus did things that only God can do. He forgave sins. He spoke with authority, doing miracles. He healed people. He casted out demons, and he calmed the storm. He did things that only God can do. He didn't have to say he was God. He lived it. He showed it by his actions, which are always louder than words. Amen? Amen. He did not have to say that he was God. He lived it. So let your actions speak louder than your words. Don't just say that you're a follower of Christ. Live it. Show the same kind of love and respect that Jesus gave even to those who do not deserve it. Remember that he showed this level of care for others even when he was on trial. And he was on trial for what he said, not what he did. Amen?